Today's serial killer was not easy to research. Man, there is a lot of misinformation out there and far too much that just cites blog posts or unreliable books that don't cite any further sources. The following is what we've been able to gather thanks to the New York Times archives and a Russian newspaper that pulled the police files from the archives in Moscow. Vasili Komarov, will use the spelling here that's used by Russian reporters, was known to officials in Moscow as passenger cab driver 639. He would become known later as the Wolf of Moscow. He was a horse dealer, or rather, he pretended to be. He was a horse cab driver. The police file acknowledges both occupations. At the time he became known to police, he was married to his second wife, Sophya, and had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. He lived in a poorer area of Moscow, the Shavalovsky quarter, where there was also a horse market and an area called Horse Square, where horse cab drivers gathered to wait for fares. He moved into the area with his family in 1921 after considering but deciding against moving to Latvia. His last name was actually Petrov, which he would change to Komarov, which is a more common name in Latvia. We have only his word for his family history, but apparently his childhood was very rough. He was a drinker at a very young age. Not long after the Komarov family moved into their little space in a house in Shavalovsky, police, which amounted to little more than volunteer bands of militia-like peacekeepers in a very, very young Soviet Union, well, they began to receive reports by locals of extremely disturbing discoveries. Bodies. Some buried in cellars of abandoned houses, some dumped into the river Moskva, some found in lots in the quarter, which was known for its bleak poverty. 22 in all they found. All of them were tightly bound into grain sacks, men and women, their hands tied behind their backs, their legs bound so that their knees touched their chins. There were scraps of hay and oats in some of the sacks, and that led police to believe that whoever was responsible, it was clear that it was the same person, must have worked with horses. Because of the number of bodies and the fear it sparked in the population, the young Soviet government took over the case and assigned a number of inspectors and investigators to find the killer. The case was taken away from the loose quasi-militia that served as a police force at the time. There were so many forensics that just weren't available at the time as well, and that's context that needs to be understood. There was no forensic reconstruction, there was no DNA, there was barely even photography or fingerprinting. They existed, but they were rarely used, so 17 of the found bodies went unidentified. All of the victims were found naked, which made authorities also believe that the killer was selling their clothing. They got lucky with the first 2 bodies they found. They were able to identify them when a relative complained that they couldn't find their sister and brother-in-law, who were flower sellers. That relative identified the first 2 bodies, and he then gave police a pretty good lead. Only a day or 2 before their disappearance, he had negotiated a deal for them from someone who wanted to purchase 100,000 rubles in flour, which was a lot at the time. The purchaser also learned that the couple was planning to make a large wholesale purchase on the very day that the couple disappeared, and they had 1,000,000 rubles on them to make that purchase. Others who had gone missing in Moscow went missing from the horse market in Shabalovsky. Investigators then realized that most of the bodies were either discovered on a Thursday or on a Saturday. The horse market only operated on Wednesdays and Fridays. So along with conducting interviews with people who neighbored the market, Horse Square, and the location where bodies were found, they began surveillance at the horse market. And they noticed that a passenger cab driver, Komarov-Petrov, attended the market frequently, but rarely did any business. However, he actually left with prospective horse buyers. So they begin to look into Komarov and find out he moved to Moscow near the time the first bodies were discovered. They learned he often had visitors in his home, and that he once tried to hang his 8-year-old son, who was only saved when his wife Sophia cut the child down. In the meantime, the body discoveries were escalating until Lenin himself demanded that this killer be found. They decided they should raid Komarov's rooms. So they had a search warrant that allowed them to search for stolen goods and corpses, but they would tell Komarov that they were looking for illegal stills, likely to avoid any violence or attempt to flee or attempt to destroy evidence by their chief suspect. While they were searching the home, they found an inordinate number of wallets and lighters, cigarette holders. They noticed that there was a locked closet just outside of where the Komarov-Petrovs stayed. And while they were going to ask the downstairs neighbor about a key, Komarov jumped out a window and fled. He would be caught at the home of a vegetable merchant just a few days later. His wife, however, was arrested right away. In the meantime, they found the body of his last victim in that closet, bound, bagged, and ready to be dumped. When he was apprehended, he gave it all up. He confessed to 33 killings in Moscow. He led police to 5 of his victims. He told police that his wife helped. She both lured victims to the home and she helped him dispose of the bodies. They learned that many bodies were disposed of outside of Moscow after Komarov acquired his own horse and buggy. Then, remembering how much he hated his neighbors, he would blame 4 of them for helping him as well. Luckily, they all had easily provable alibis and were released. He would claim that he wanted to die, could not wait to be executed, and that he had tried and failed to off himself 3 times. He told police what they already knew for most of the bodies. He hit them in the head with a hammer and then strangled them just to be sure they were gone. Then he told them something no one knew. Only one person ever resisted. Only one person ever fought back. Sophia would also confess and corroborate her husband's confession. They were each charged with 29 murders, and their trial opened on June 6, 1923. It attracted so much public interest that it was held in Moscow's Polytechnic Museum. He would be interviewed by reporters while waiting trial and told them, quote, "I am 52, I've had a good time, and don't want to live any longer," end quote. And that murder was an awfully easy job. He was sarcastic and obstructive in a very short trial that lasted only 2 days. He would say that he can't even remember the names of some of his victims. He did say that he only killed 1 man in revenge, a man who outbid him on a horse he wanted. He would say the rest he robbed because he needed money for food and drink. All told, the crimes netted him an equivalent of $26.40 US at the time. June 7th, 1923 comes along and he and his wife, Sophia, are condemned to death. He appealed for a new trial, pleaded for clemency. He made a special clemency plea for his wife. All of those were denied, and the pair were executed by firing squad on June the 21st. The 3 children presumably were taken to orphanages. All we know is that they were to be raised at the state's expense. There is no record available of what really became of them. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.